How's everybody tonight? Y'all get a good dinner in? Good nap? I don't think my wife got her nap in today, so I may have problems when I go home. I don't know. But I don't know what it is about this podium up here, this altar, but it's like about 14 inches high. Usually when I'm higher than something, usually it's a deer. And I'm like, hey, I got you this time. But now I'm sitting up here looking down on y'all and I'm like, y'all got me. When Mr. West told me, when he asked me to speak this evening for Baptist Men's Day, I was a little hesitant to commit. But then I asked myself, how can I expect God to do good on my behalf if I'm not willing to do good for Him?
Amen.
Not that our salvation requires any work at all, but if you take into perspective exactly what He did for us on the cross, we should all be willing to use our time, our talents, and our money to honor Him. With that, thinking about my personal relationship with Christ, there are several words that I could use to describe the link between Jesus and myself. The one word that really comes to mind for me is perseverance. And I say that because I'm not sure if it could be because Jesus is probably a little tired of chasing me for all these years, or it could be a personal battle of trying to do things the way He wants them done without allowing the sin in my life to creep back in. With that in mind, I would have to say that following Christ and living for Him hasn't always been easy, at least not for me. There are often times that it will be easier to revert back to old ways and old habits to handle problems or situations that come up in my life, and there are still times that happens. But I have to remember that God never promised following Him would be easy. In fact, He says life will often be filled with trials, along with pressures from the devil, constantly reminding me of my past sins. He says in Matthew chapter 16 to take up my cross and to follow Him. I've never physically carried a cross before, but I can imagine that thing's pretty heavy. Thinking of my sins, I know it is. When encountering these obstacles and carrying our cross through life, we need to remember that God is always there, willing to carry us as well as our cross, if we just ask. Perseverance defined the continued effort to do or achieve something. And in my case, I think that something is doing God's will no matter the circumstances. Thomas Edison once said that many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. In Philippians chapter 4, verse 13 is, I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. In Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, let us not be weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. All things in life require perseverance to some extent. But God wants us to deal with these trials with His help and guidance. Whether it's school, work, sickness, or loss of a loved one. The one thing that we should always remember, though, through any of these challenges is not to get ahead of God. If we persevere through Him and be patient, He will lead us down the best possible path, and a path that will draw us closer and nearer to Him. To wrap up, I've got just a quick, funny story about perseverance, and I thought my main character was going to be here tonight, but it looks like he backed out on me, which he's probably scared of what I might say about him. But I'm not sure how many of you know this about me, but I have somewhat of an obsession, and it's a seasonal problem. It usually starts the last week of March, and it lasts for about 6 weeks. My wife has learned to cope with the issue over the years, and she has come to realize that it'll never go away. Every time I've tried to curb my habit, the pull just seems to get worse. And I used to think my problem wasn't contagious, but through the years I've seen others become hooked on the same habit as myself. God's creation in nature is something that has always mesmerized me, and is one of the many gifts that He has given us to enjoy while here on earth. Springtime and turkey season, to be specific, is the one addiction that I hope I never get rid of. One particular year, I had a good friend that fell into this trap of chasing these creatures through the swamps and pine lands of our South Georgia landscape. Opening morning came and we located a big gobbler with several hens in a small secluded field. That particular morning my cousin came along with us, and he was the intended shooter, my plan A. And my friend, he was just along for the ride, but I actually passed my gun off to him that morning for my plan B, because if any of you have ever been in the woods before, I know several of you have, something will go wrong. But well, naturally something didn't go quite right, and I called the birds up into the corner of the field with a big gobbler. He came in last, and he finally gets close enough to kill, so I tell my cousin to go ahead and shoot. All I hear is a click, and I knew at that point we had problems. So I looked over at my plan B, my good friend, and I told him to go ahead and shoot. I just, motioned to him to go ahead and shoot. And this time we didn't have a misfire, but the shot was so far off the mark, it took a few seconds for the big bird to even realize he was the intended target. Several more shots were fired at the bird with only a few feathers to show for it. And it's funny how the devil's always waiting in the bushes to ruin a beautiful morning in the woods. After a short animated discussion, I turned around and started walking towards the truck. Several weeks and a few more missed opportunities went by for my good friend. We've been friends for quite a long time, so I don't think he'll feel like, I don't think he'd mind me picking on him, but I'm not sure. But at this point, I'm not sure he was persevering the most, him or myself. But the last weekend of the season, it closed in on us. My cousin, who was off at school, had a tract of land down the river outside of Abbeville a few miles. And I figured he wouldn't mind if we went and hunted without him, since there was really no reason to think that my good friend's luck was going to change anytime soon. But early that morning, we started easing into the swamp and down an old logging road. Soon the sun starts coming up. And if any of you hadn't experienced that, y'all need to, or I recommend you to anyways. I enjoy it. But the sun starts coming up and birds start gobbling. And I started soft calling some, and we had one answer us down the creek about 400 or 500 yards, I reckon. We moved in a little closer to a small grassy bottom and set up a decoy and moved back into the shadows up against a big oak tree. I called a few more times and the bird continues to gobble, and I suddenly look up and I see the bird flying up the creek to us. He lights up in the top of a big cypress tree alongside the creek to check things out, probably 150 yards off. And I leaned over and whispered to my friend, and I told him, I said, hey, I said, get ready. I said, there's a bird. I said, that's one we've been looking for. And he very cautiously and turns and looks at me, and he says, man, that's a buzzard. And this is all true. I'm not making this up. I start feeling that same frustrating feeling I've felt all year start creeping up my leg again. I'm finally able to convince him that that's the bird that we're after. About the time he decides to fly out of the cypress tree into the green patch in front of us. The bird slowly starts strutting in towards the decoy and comes into shotgun range. And finally, after several seconds that seem like minutes, my friend shoots. Much to my surprise, everything goes right this time. Joe Barfield has killed his first buzzard, and my contagious fever has broken for the year.